No one noticed the man at first, not really. He stood there like a smudge on polished glass, a quiet presence in a room trained to overlook him. Corporate uniforms filled the space. Sharp suits, gleaming watches, loud voices with nothing to say. And then there was him, dark-skinned, dressed in something too plain, too neat, too silent. Not out of place, but out of favor. They saw him the way you see a shadow at the edge of a spotlight. There, but never the focus. Not important, not relevant. They exchanged glances, whispered jokes, let their laughter grow bolder in his silence. Because in their world, black and quiet meant invisible, replaceable. But they had no idea who they were standing next to. No clue what had already been set in motion. Because this wasn't just another meeting. It was the start of their undoing. And the man they overlooked? He wasn't just watching. He was remembering. If that opening pulled you in, hit the like button, subscribe for the full story, and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? And how do you think this is going to end? It was 8:42 a.m. when he stepped into the building, a towering slab of glass and pride rising against the San Francisco skyline. The Helix Corporation logo hovered in the air above the reception desk, projected in perfect clarity like a modern-day insignia of royalty. The air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and cold ambition. Cashin's ID badge hesitated before unlocking the second turnstile. A pause, then a beep. It was the fourth time this month the system had done that. The receptionist didn't look up. She never did. Her eyes flicked across her screen, as though searching for someone more important to greet. Cashin didn't take offense. He knew his place, or rather, the place they'd forced him into. He passed the coffee bar, where a small group from data science huddled in conversation. Their voices dropped slightly as he approached, but the laughter returned as soon as he passed. Chad Brinker's voice rose above them all, as always. Loud, polished, artificial. Cashin's shoes tapped on the polished concrete toward the private elevator that led to floor 41. Executive strategy. He pressed the button, glanced at the camera lens above the panel, and waited. When the doors opened, no one else was inside. A blessing. He adjusted the strap of his shoulder bag, checked the USB drive in his pocket, and straightened his spine as the elevator climbed. He never got used to this part. The journey upward, passing floor after floor of people who had no idea what he had built here. He watched the numbers blink past. 1825, 3240. The elevator chimed. He stepped out into a corridor of glass and white walls. Everything was quiet, deliberate. Cashin had been summoned to the quarterly review of Project Atria, a high-budget initiative that had nearly been scrapped until he stepped in to salvage it. 3 months of reconstruction, late-night analytics, and fieldwork. He had mapped the pivot, realigned the budget, and rewritten the launch timeline. The projections he had compiled weren't just promising. They were industry-shifting. But none of that showed on his face. His expression was neutral, composed, almost serene. As he entered conference room D, he immediately sensed a shift. No greeting, no nod. Eyes flicked up, then down. The table was full. Chad sat at the head, sleeves rolled just enough to show his Rolex. Beside him, Ashley Simmons from Brand Strategy held a steaming cappuccino in one hand and her phone in the other. Everyone else wore variations of the same: crisp blazers, smirks, and entitlement. The screen at the front displayed the Helix logo. Cashin stepped toward the corner of the table, standing quietly, waiting his turn. His name wasn't on the printed agenda clipped to the glass wall. He noticed that too. Chad was speaking, a fluid stream of exaggerated jargon spilling from his mouth like a podcast on 1.5x speed. We're targeting vertical synergy on this quarter's residual metrics. The solution isn't just scalability, it's self-correcting scale. Heads nodded. Laughter broke out at an inside joke Cashin didn't understand, or maybe wasn't meant to. Then Chad gestured loosely toward the screen. Next up, a few notes from our ground-level efforts. Let's give Cashin the floor. He's got something. It wasn't an introduction. It was an invitation to fail. Cashin stepped forward, connected his USB drive. Nothing happened. He tried again. Still nothing. A third time. The screen blinked, then flashed white. Laughter trickled in, Before he turned around, they were already grinning. A video had replaced his slides, a cartoon animation. A bald, gaunt caricature with a birthmark slipped on a cord and smacked into a pie chart. Bold text read, "Quarterly Clown Show, starring our favorite freelance failure." The room erupted. Cashin stood motionless. One breath. Two. The screen flickered back to the Helix logo. Chad chuckled into his hand. "All right, that's enough fun. Back to real metrics. Let's roll through product." Cashin stepped aside. No apology. No attempt to let him present. He remained at the edge of the room, pressed against the glass wall, folio still in hand, slides unseen, voice unused. That hope had died the moment that animation played. Down on the 27th floor, Cashin stopped at the team cafe area, seeking caffeine or maybe just a pause to reassemble himself. The barista, someone new, gave him a puzzled glance before reaching for a mug labeled guests. He poured the dregs of what was clearly hours-old coffee, offered no cream, and walked away before Cashin could ask for a fresh pot. Cashin didn't complain. He simply accepted the lukewarm insult in silence and sat at the counter, away from the clusters of colleagues who began filtering in after the meeting. Most didn't notice him. A few did, but chose to act like they didn't. Chad came in with Ashley a few minutes later, their voices carrying across the space like casual gunfire. Ashley swiped through her phone, her voice light and amused. She tilted her screen toward Chad, who erupted in another bout of laughter. "How'd you even do that to the animation?" he asked, his voice full of glee. "I didn't," she said mock-innocently. "Marketing intern. He has a sense of humor." They were talking about the meme, the same one that played on screen before Cashin could speak. A wave of pressure spread behind Cashin's eyes, but he said nothing. That moment had already left the confines of the meeting room and was now office folklore. Another story they'd tell over drinks. He stood, intending to leave quietly, but as he passed behind them, Chad's voice cut the air again. "Hey, Ro," he said, not turning. "Appreciate the groundwork. Cleanup crew's important too." Cashin didn't respond. He walked away, not faster, not slower. He had spent a decade learning how to take humiliation without showing it. But the wound wasn't in the insult itself. It was in the precision, how thoroughly they knew where to strike. Hours later, Cashin returned to his desk, if it could still be called that. His office, formerly near the eastern-facing window, had been relocated to a windowless space beside the archival room. No one had told him why. There were no photos, no nameplate, not even a chair that adjusted properly. His screen had a sticky note that read, "IT touch this. Pray accordingly." Likely another joke. Likely not. He logged in, or tried to. His password returned an error. He attempted the recovery protocol. Access denied. An hour passed before he found someone from IT. They shrugged, checked the system, and explained casually that his role had been recategorized in the system. Not demoted, not promoted, just adjusted. Contractor protocol got flagged, the technician said. Could be a glitch. You'll need admin to override. Admin? Cashin was supposed to be admin, at least until now. He left IT with the knowledge that his digital profile had been placed into a different tier, below analyst, below coordinator, technically below intern. No one had informed him. No one had corrected it. Across the hall, people passed without looking in his direction. In the elevator later that afternoon, someone Cashin had mentored years ago stepped in, glanced his way, then subtly shifted to the other side. When the doors opened, she exited without a word. By the end of the day, whispers had begun. A screenshot circulated in a private message thread, Cashin's staff profile with the caption, "This man will explain Agile to your grandma if you ask nicely." Someone in design mocked up an altered org chart showing him under miscellaneous services. He overheard a conversation near the water cooler where a junior associate described Cashin as the compliance guy or something. His name was being erased one mislabel at a time. He spent the evening alone in his reassigned workspace, trying to recover access to the Atria files. They were gone, moved to a private repository under Chad's credentials. Locked. Proprietary. He clicked through shared folders, watched access bars go red. Locked, locked, locked. Cashin sat back and looked around. No photos on his desk. No clutter. Nothing to mark that he belonged here. Nothing to show he ever had. His hands trembled slightly, a detail he refused to acknowledge. As the floor emptied and the lights dimmed to energy-saving mode, Cashin powered off his terminal and stood. On his way out, he passed a bulletin board near the break room. Someone had printed a comic hand-drawn, clearly rushed, of a superhero boardroom, with stick figure versions of Chad, Ashley, and others sitting around a table, while a shadowy figure outside the window pressed his face to the glass. The shadow had a blotch on the cheek. A speech bubble floated above the others. Should we let him in? The response, only if he brings coffee this time. He didn't stop walking. He didn't tear it down. He let it stay. Because humiliation had become performance art at Helix, and Cashin had become its unwilling main character. At the break room near the 27th floor, the small table where he occasionally sat alone had been removed. In its place, a vase filled with artificial sunflowers stood beside a new sign labeled Team Collab Zone, reserved for groups only. He turned toward the back counter, looking for the usual rack of morning snacks and coffee pitchers. Gone. Instead, a new espresso machine gleamed beside a slim iPad login screen. He tapped for access. Denied. Access restricted to full-time executive staff only. Someone behind him coughed, loudly enough to imply impatience. Cashin stepped aside as two marketing interns breezed in, tapped the screen, and selected their drinks without issue. They ignored him completely. At his reassigned desk, a plain wooden chair had replaced the previous ergonomic one. The drawers had been rearranged, some still slightly open as if ransacked, and the cord to his monitor was missing. A small pink sticky note was placed on his keyboard. "Welcome back, smiley face. Ops team." The smiley face felt more like a scar. He sat down anyway, retrieved his personal laptop from his bag, and tried to log in through the guest Wi-Fi. It took longer than usual. When it connected, the bandwidth throttled him to near dial-up speeds. He didn't bother reporting it. In the open floor behind him, a chorus of laughter erupted from the new content strategy pod. Chad's voice was unmistakable, low, amused, condescending. Cashin glanced up through the glass wall. The group was huddled around something on Chad's phone. One of them pointed. Another wiped tears of laughter from her eyes. Cashin turned his gaze away before he could confirm the obvious. Minutes later, he received an email forwarded from HR. It was titled Reorientation Resources and listed a set of mandatory training videos for internal contractors on time tracking, brand conduct, and escalation protocols. His name was CC'd alongside two interns and a temp copywriter. He scrolled to the bottom. Deadline for completion. End of business today. Failure to comply may result in suspension of access. Cashin's jaw tightened, but he clicked the link. Halfway through a compliance module, a colleague from finance, someone he'd once coached through her first client budget proposal, walked past his desk and dropped a napkin onto the keyboard without a word. On it was a doodle, a cartoon stick figure with a birthmark holding a sign that read, "Will spreadsheet for food." The figure stood beside a trash bin labeled Legacy Assets. Cashin stared at the napkin for a full minute before folding it quietly and placing it inside his drawer. It wasn't just mockery anymore. It had become tradition. At lunch, Cashin walked into the cafeteria alone. He had hoped to sit quietly, eat quickly, and return to work unnoticed. But even this was no longer possible. As he carried his tray past the clusters of long tables, he spotted an empty seat beside a group from the strategy team. He approached silently, hoping to join without fanfare. Before he could place his tray, one of the team members stood up. Another followed. In less than 30 seconds, the group gathered their belongings and moved to a table further away, leaving their untouched sandwiches behind like a metaphor for everything Cashin had become. He didn't sit. He couldn't. His chest tightened as he stared at the abandoned seats, the hollow absence of welcome louder than any insult. He carried his tray to a distant corner, found an isolated two-top near the emergency exit, and ate in silence. The only sound was the hum of the vent above him and the dull scrape of his plastic fork. Afterward, he passed the elevator bay to return to his floor, only to find his keycard no longer granted access to floor 27. The light turned red, and the elevator remained still. A small sign posted beside the call button read, "Floors 25-29, access restricted to department leadership." No prior memo, no warning. He took the stairs. At the stairwell landing, he paused to catch his breath. He wasn't out of shape, but everything felt heavier now. Every step, every glance, every interaction. By the time he returned to his desk, a memo had been slid under his keyboard. It wasn't digital. It was a folded piece of company letterhead, handwritten in blue ink. No signature. It read, "Project Atria is now under direct oversight by product. Further contributions should be vetted through CHADB for approval. Unauthorized activity may result in escalation." It was both an erasure and a warning, as if he hadn't rebuilt that project from nothing, as if his existence in its history was an error they were correcting. Cashin spent the next 3 hours working on unrelated tasks, none of which required strategy or vision. He responded to vendor emails, reviewed outdated asset reports, and watched from a distance as the rest of the company moved with the smooth arrogance of people who believed their place was permanent. Late that afternoon, a junior developer entered the floor with a cardboard box. She walked directly to Cashin's desk and placed the box beside his monitor. "From the archive department," she mumbled, not meeting his eyes. "Said it's overflow." She turned and left. Inside the box were outdated reports, old marketing brochures, and a few binders from an initiative Cashin had worked on 5 years ago, before Helix went global. At the bottom, he found a framed photo cracked in one corner, showing a group of 5 people from the company's early days. He was in the center, standing beside the 2 original founders, arms crossed, smiling faintly. None of those people worked here anymore. He headed straight for his desk, if it could still be called that, wondering if it had even survived the night. It had, but something else hadn't. His desktop monitor was missing, replaced by a small laminated card taped to the back wall of the desk. All workstation assets currently under IT review. Contact CHADB for reallocation approvals. Another signature-free directive, designed to strip away utility without explanation. His heart sank lower than he thought it could. He sat in the stiff wooden chair, opened his own laptop, and began another day of being invisible. Except today, his invisibility had been codified. Half an hour into his morning, he received a calendar invite from legal, an unexpected alignment session regarding intellectual property clarity. It was vague, but mandatory. The meeting was set in conference room B2, 3 levels below the main floors, a space normally used for compliance interviews and vendor disputes. Cashin arrived 2 minutes early. The room smelled of disinfectant and stale carpet. A young legal associate greeted him without eye contact and handed him a printout titled Clarification of Ownership for Ongoing Strategic Projects. It was a legal form pre-filled. His name appeared in Section 3, not as a contributor or lead, but as a supporting analyst under contract-based services. It referenced Project Atria, his own creation. He sat in silence as the associate explained monotonously that the company was consolidating records and that these classifications were in alignment with current resource tiers. He was told to sign to avoid disruption in future collaborative access. He stared at the page. The language was airtight, even if he thought it would go nowhere. And he knew it. He signed without a word, handed the document back, and left the room with a burning sensation in his throat. He had just legally signed away authorship of his most important work. Back on the main floor, he passed the strategy war room. Inside, Chad stood at the board, talking animatedly, pointing to slides that Cashin recognized instantly. His formatting, his models, his framework. The team clapped. Cashin moved on before anyone noticed him lingering. At his desk, a new task was waiting. A mass-forwarded email from HR with the subject line, Facilities Asset Audit. It included a list of items for clearance under his name, 2 whiteboards, an office chair from his previous location, and a standing desk converter. all marked for return or justification. Failure to respond within 48 hours would trigger a resource reclamation process. They were coming for the furniture now. He stared at the screen, numb. That afternoon, he walked the long hallway to the finance floor to inquire about his expense report for last quarter, the one he had submitted a month ago, still unpaid. The woman at the desk glanced at her monitor, frowned, then told him his account had been flagged for a policy update. "You'll need manager-level approval now," she said. "I'm sorry, it's a new rule." He nodded. He didn't ask who had changed the rule. He already knew. Outside the glass wall, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. Muted, distant, smaller, somehow. He looked like a guest. Not a strategist. Not a founder. Just someone slowly being pushed toward the exit. He returned to his desk and tried to finish what work he could still access, but his inbox had slowed to a trickle. He was off the important chains now. The meetings, the updates, the strategy decks. All of it had moved on without him. Toward the end of the day, he received a group-wide announcement from Chad. As part of our leadership realignment, we're optimizing internal roles for better efficiency. Please welcome Sarah Vinton, who will be taking the lead on Atria's final integration sprint. The image below showed Sarah, bright, smiling, seated in front of a slide Cashin had created 3 months ago. His last living mark was now hers. He didn't read the replies. He didn't have to. There were hearts, applause emojis, clapping gifs. Chad replied with a joke. "You know the drill, new captain, same ship." The message was meant to be cheerful, but Cashin understood what it really meant. They'd taken his ship, repainted it, changed the name, and left him marooned. The final insult came after 6. He'd stayed late, as usual, if only to avoid the awkward elevator ride down with people who pretended not to see him. As he packed his bag, the lights above flickered briefly. Then the screen behind him lit up with a company-wide push notification. Quarterly town hall attendance mandatory for all active strategic staff. Cashin clicked the link. His access denied. Below it, a note. "If you believe this is an error, please contact your department lead." There was no point. The message was clear. He wasn't strategic staff anymore. The walls were closing in with methodical precision. Every channel was narrowing. Every space that once held his name was being scrubbed clean. Cashin left the building through the east exit, avoiding the lobby's fluorescent glare. On the sidewalk, the wind cut through his coat. He passed by 2 co-workers who didn't recognize him or pretended not to. When he reached the break room, he didn't stop. He already knew the coffee machine wouldn't serve him, that his badge wouldn't register, and that any brief eye contact would be met with awkward silence or performative distraction. The faces around him weren't malicious, not overtly, but they all wore the same practiced neutrality, the corporate instinct to look away from the collapse of a colleague who no longer benefited them. His desk was still there, barely. Someone had moved it a few inches to make room for a newer standing desk on the row, the kind reserved for senior staff. A printed label on the edge of that desk read, "Priority Allocation Vinton." Sarah Vinton, the new lead of Atria, the woman who now carried Cashin's legacy like a handbag, smiling and waving in meetings where she barely understood the architecture of the thing she now claimed to lead. Cashin sat without a sound and opened his laptop. The login credentials worked, but barely. The shared drive had removed his access to 3 major folders. The internet portal now listed him under operational support, and his department ID had been changed again, this time to a 6-digit placeholder number typically assigned to temp contractors. The final insult came mid-morning when he attempted to use the team printer to print a vendor receipt. The screen flashed red. Access denied, consult resource coordinator. As he turned from a failed attempt, someone passed behind him and dropped a small, pre-sealed packet onto his desk. Inside was a Helix-branded name tag with a red border instead of the usual silver. Red indicated a visitor or limited-term personnel. Cashin held the plastic badge in his hand and stared at it long enough for the symbolism to sink in. He was no longer even part of the background. He was a red border, an anomaly waiting to be deleted. At lunch, the cafeteria was louder than usual. Today was Helix's Culture Pulse Day, a monthly event where the company offered themed meals and encouraged departments to mingle and share wins. Long banners hung from the ceiling. Posters displayed smiling employee photos. Cashin's face wasn't among them. He picked up a tray and moved through the line. As he approached the serving station, a catering staffer glanced at his red-bordered name tag and quietly handed him a boxed basic meal. No choices, no explanation, just a sealed container, pre-packed and pre-selected. He sat at the far corner of the cafeteria near a column, away from the long rows of excited conversations. From his spot, he could see a group forming near the presentation stage where Chad had just stepped up with a mic. "Let's give a big hand to Sarah," he said, "who's leading Atria into the next chapter. Couldn't do it without you, and definitely couldn't have done it with what we had before." Laughter followed. Sarah did a mock bow. Cashin didn't move. His fork paused midair. He heard someone whisper his name behind him, just a breath of syllables, before a hush fell over that pocket of tables. He finished the boxed meal without tasting it and left without saying a word. When he returned to his desk, he noticed something new. A pop-up banner on his intranet homepage labeled Performance Enhancement Program Select Staff. Curious, he clicked it. It opened to a dashboard showing a list of individuals enrolled in a new internal feedback initiative. His name was there. No explanation had been given. No email. Just his name, tagged with a red flag icon, and a blank column for behavioral assessment checkpoints. He searched for details. Nothing. He checked with HR, who forwarded him a one-line reply. "Your inclusion is part of a rotating pilot group. No action is needed at this time." It was a lie. He knew that immediately. Helix didn't pilot random groups. Every decision was calculated. This was surveillance. Preemptive justification. They were gathering ammunition. That afternoon, a courier arrived on the floor with small boxes for a handful of employees. Custom-printed mugs from a recent team success challenge. Cashin's desk was skipped. The courier checked his clipboard twice, then moved on. 5 minutes later, Ashley walked by sipping from her mug, which bore a stylized rocket labeled Atria Ignition Squad. As she passed, she muttered just loud enough, "Oh, you didn't get one? Must be a fulfillment error." She smiled without looking. Cashin didn't respond. He simply turned back to his screen and opened a spreadsheet he didn't need to finish. His days had shifted from contribution to containment. He had no meetings on the calendar, no real tasks assigned. Every click, every attempt to stay useful was like rearranging furniture in a house being foreclosed. He tried at times to reach out, to send suggestions, forward ideas, comment in internal threads. But none received replies. His name no longer carried weight. His messages felt like echoes in an empty building. Toward the end of the day, the company's Slack channel buzzed with a photo of Chad and Sarah shaking hands in front of a new design board labeled Future of Atria. Cashin's original flowchart had been rebranded, but the bones were unmistakable. The caption beneath the photo read, "A new era built on fresh thinking." Fresh, as if Cashin's work hadn't been the very foundation, as if he had never mattered. At 5:30, he powered down his laptop, closed his bag, and walked the now familiar path to the elevator. The red name tag, still clipped to his belt, felt heavier than it should. He passed a janitor on the way out, someone who had worked the building longer than most of the executives. The man gave him a small nod. Cashin returned it. It was the only real acknowledgement he received all day. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, and the air smelled of concrete and exhaust. He walked past the row of parking spaces reserved for leadership. The elevator was half full, but when he stepped in, a small hush fell over the others. A cough, a shuffle, someone scrolling faster through their phone. He stood in the back, face blank, hands folded, a man shrinking within his own silhouette. Floor 27 chimed, and he exited to an open hallway that once held possibility. Now it only offered avoidance. He reached his desk and found it untouched, but stripped of its one remaining comfort. The chair was gone. In its place stood a folding stool typically reserved for event overflow. A sticky note on the desk read, "Please use temporary seating until audit complete ops." He stood for a moment, then sat on the unstable stool, opening his laptop with the familiarity of a ritual he no longer believed in. His inbox had only 2 messages. One was an automated payroll update confirming that his classification had shifted from exempt to non-exempt. The other was a company-wide bulletin celebrating Atria's official internal relaunch, now under Sarah Vinton's oversight. The subject line read, "Reimagined, refocused, reborn." Beneath it was a graphic, a rising phoenix made of data points and light, captioned with the words, "Built by believers." Cashin stared at the phrase for nearly a full minute. He remembered designing that visual concept 6 months ago. He remembered where he'd first pitched it and how it had been quietly dismissed. Now it had become their branding, their statement of vision, and he had become their ghost. He closed the message and stood. There was no work to do, nothing left for him to contribute. Every door was sealed, every folder locked. He walked to the far end of the floor, where the archive shelves stood untouched. There, beyond view, he simply stood still, breathing in the quiet hum of the building and trying to remember what it used to feel like to be part of something. The silence was broken by footsteps, not rushed, measured. Chad Brinker's voice preceded his form by half a second. "Row," he said, casually, as if invoking an old friend. Cashin didn't turn. Chad continued, leaning against the nearby support beam, arms folded. "You've been quiet," he said. "I hope you're taking all these transitions in stride." Still, Cashin said nothing. Chad clicked his tongue thoughtfully. "Look, I know it's been a shift, but these things evolve. It's not personal." He waited. When silence remained, he added, "You could still be useful, you know. There's always a place for people who know how to keep their heads down." Cashin turned finally, slowly. His eyes met Chad's. Calm, empty. "I'm not trying to be useful to you," he said. His voice didn't rise. It didn't tremble. It simply landed. Chad's smile thinned. "Suit yourself." He turned and walked off, whistling low under his breath. Back at his desk, Cashin found that his login credentials had been reset. Again, a new password had been emailed to him, accompanied by a message. Per IT directive, credentials will rotate bi-weekly for non-permanent contributors. Another demotion. Another rule, unwritten, applied only to him. He typed the new password. Access granted. But not to much. All his shared folders were gone. Even his personal drive had been archived into read-only mode. He sat there for a long while, not moving, staring at the hollowed-out shell of his digital world. Around him, the buzz of productivity continued. People laughed. Deadlines were pushed. Meetings were taken. None of them with him. Later that day, he received a calendar invitation titled 360 Feedback Loop Optional, but encouraged. It was from HR, listing Cashin among 5 employees invited to participate in a reflection session to help improve collaborative practices across departments. It was scheduled in a side conference room far from the central floors. Cashin knew what it was, a performance feedback trap designed to build a paper trail. He almost declined it, but then he realized it didn't matter. They were going to do it with or without him. He accepted. At the scheduled time, he walked into a beige room with no windows, where a junior HR rep smiled nervously and handed out feedback forms. Cashin's form had only one section filled in, the part where he was evaluated by others. The comments weren't signed. Tends to work in isolation. Unclear in communication. Sometimes resistant to process. Unwilling to collaborate on shared vision. It was fiction. All of it. But fiction repeated enough times becomes company culture. Cashin didn't protest. He didn't write anything in the comment section. In the elevator, a rising hum of laughter filled the space, but Cashin heard none of it. His thoughts were submerged in static, white and cold, and yet precise. Each insult, each reclassification, each policy that had strategically carved his presence from relevance echoed like precise chisel strokes. At his desk, the folding stool had been removed without replacement. He stood. No explanation. No note. The message was implicit. You're not supposed to stay long enough to sit. On his screen, a new pop-up banner appeared. Final notice, pending asset return. Below, it was a list: access badge, headset, and laptop. The word final was highlighted in red. He didn't react. He opened a hidden folder from his encrypted drive and stared at it for several seconds. Inside it were backups, not of corporate data, but of photos, screenshots, memos, meeting records, all captured quietly, all time-stamped, all dated back to the earliest days of Project Atria. The documents were his silent witnesses. At 10:02 a.m., Chad's assistant emailed a calendar invitation for a team vision alignment meeting in the executive forum. The invite went to the entire strategic development staff, except Cashin. He wouldn't have known, except someone accidentally included him in a reply all. He clicked on the thread and watched as people RSVP'd with jokes and emojis. Chad responded to one, no row this time, so no fear of unfiltered math talk. Laugh reacts followed. They were building camaraderie atop the rubble of his exclusion. At noon, the building buzzed with catered deliveries and spontaneous celebration. Word spread quickly that Helix had secured a major international contract, one Cashin knew they'd only landed because of a pitch format he'd built last year. The format had been stripped of his name and reassigned to a product manager who once mocked Cashin's writing style in a meeting. Cashin didn't join the celebration. He watched from the hallway as Chad stood atop a platform in the cafe, holding a mic, his sleeves rolled, shouting over applause. "This is what happens when we clear out the dead weight," Chad laughed. "Make room for the real talent." Someone handed him a glass of champagne. He raised it, to cutting the anchors loose. Applause roared like a tidal wave. That was the moment something inside Cashin began to split. Not with rage, not with panic, but with focus. An eerie stillness formed inside him, precise and surgical. The next morning, he arrived early again. There was an open town hall scheduled for that afternoon, one of those quarterly broadcasts where leadership answered pre-submitted questions in front of a crowd. Usually forgettable, but this one had potential. Cashin sat at his desk, or stood, rather, and began curating a presentation. Not in the Helix system, not using company software. On his own device. He crafted it with meticulous care, loading it with images, emails, time-stamped edits, and one particularly damning message from Chad, sent 2 years ago, dismissing an entire department's concerns as optics fluff for weak hires. At 3 p.m., employees gathered in the atrium. Rows of chairs faced a wide screen as Chad, Sarah, and a few others took seats at the front. Microphones stood ready. Livestream cameras blinked red. Cashin stood in the back, silent. No one noticed him. They were too busy watching the screen display the town hall banner, voices of Helix transparency and trust. The irony nearly made him smile. As the session began, pre-vetted questions were read aloud and answered with polished assurance. Sarah handled most with grace. Chad joked through others. Laughter came easily from a crowd. Cashin stepped closer to the media table near the side wall. A technician adjusted sound levels. Another was preparing a video file for playback. Cashin approached without hesitation. "Projector sync error," he said, pointing to the side feed. "Sarah's display resolution will cut unless you reroute through Presentation B." The technician blinked. "Did they send you?" "Executive support," Cashin replied. His voice didn't shake. He held up a lanyard, an old one he had kept from a previous summit. It looked official enough. The tech nodded. "We were about to switch displays. Use this input." "No," Cashin said. "Use mine. Run it clean to the projector feed. Override secondary." He handed over a USB. The technician plugged it in. The signal shifted. The screen went black, then white, then loaded the file. For a moment, no one noticed. Then it began. First, a still image, Project Atria logo stripped, replaced with the words theft in plain sight. Then, a slide filled with contributor names, Cashin's at the top, followed by red X's through every person who had falsely taken credit. The crowd fell silent. The moderators blinked. Chad leaned forward. "What the hell?" The next slide showed internal chat logs, blurred except for the messages. Chad mocking Cashin's models. Chad requesting that his name be hidden from a failed proposal. Sarah asking whether the old strategist was still around to cause trouble. Then came the timeline, a flowchart showing Cashin's original documents and the edits made as others quietly rebranded them. Each slide layered humiliation, theft, and erasure. Cashin walked into Helix headquarters just after 8 a.m., not with a smirk or swagger, but with the composure of a man walking directly through a storm, not around it. The receptionist froze mid-conversation when he entered. Her eyes darted to her screen, likely searching for updated directives. None had been issued. She didn't stop him. He scanned his badge. Green. For the first time in months, it didn't flash red. He took the elevator to the 27th floor. The silence inside was tight, suspended. When the doors opened, all heads turned. The noise dropped by degrees. People stared. Some stood up, half aware they were doing it. Cashin didn't flinch. He walked to his desk, or where his desk used to be. It had been cleared. Nothing remained. No computer, no papers, not even the folding stool. Just a square of dust where the legs had once stood. He didn't linger. He continued past the rows of stiff-backed colleagues, many of whom avoided his eyes, though a few nodded subtly, a sign of something cracking in the wall. As he reached the far end of the floor, Sarah Vinton stepped out of the executive huddle room. Her face was tight, polished in panic. "Cashin," she said too loud. "We need to talk." "Later," he said calmly. "After your debrief." "This isn't the time for—" "No," he said. "You've had your time." He passed her and entered the glass conference room that had once been his to lead. Inside, two project heads from Strategic were arguing in hushed tones. They stopped when they saw him. One of them reached for their phone. Cashin pulled something from his coat. A badge. Not the red-bordered one. The original. Embossed, gold-sealed, the kind reserved only for founders. "This isn't over," he said, placing it on the table. "But it started a long time ago, and you've all been pretending it didn't." The silence hit like a tremor, because suddenly they understood. The rumors weren't just rumors. Cashin hadn't just been some early employee. He wasn't just a strategist. He had been there before the first pitch deck, before the seed funding, before the rebranding that made Helix into the tech beast it had become. His name wasn't on the website. It wasn't in the public narrative. But he was the buried thread, the first architect, the ghost in the machine. And now the ghost had stepped back into the light. In the executive suite, Chad was sweating through his shirt. The internal security team stood outside the glass door, unsure whether to enter. Legal had gone dark. HR had yet to issue a response. The footage from the town hall was being reviewed by investors, board members, and, worse, potential partners. Atria, their flagship product, was now in question. Its origin story, its integrity, its future. "This is sabotage," Chad barked. "Get IT to lock him out permanently." But IT was stalling. The infrastructure team was no longer following blind orders. Cashin had once trained half of them. He had mentored their director during the platform migration. They weren't sure who the real threat was anymore. By noon, an all-hands meeting was announced. It was rare, unexpected, and held in the central auditorium. Employees filled the space with murmurs, unsure of what to expect. At the front, the leadership table remained conspicuously empty. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, Sarah appeared alone. Her eyes were rimmed with fatigue, her smile brittle. "We understand there have been revelations," she began, her voice thin. "Some unexpected disclosures during yesterday's town hall." Murmurs spread. "We are investigating the matter thoroughly and want to assure everyone that Helix values integrity," and her words faltered. The doors at the back opened. Cashin walked in. He didn't head to the stage. He didn't raise his voice. He simply stood halfway down the aisle, facing forward. That alone was enough. The crowd turned. The silence deepened. Sarah's composure cracked. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though her mic carried it to everyone. "And yet I am," Cashin said, finally stepping forward. "You all know my name now. You've seen the documents. You've heard the jokes, the theft, the rewriting of history. But let me make something clear. His voice carried without a mic. This isn't just about credit. It's about complicity. About the quiet way some of you laughed while they stripped everything away. About the systems that let them do it without challenge. That celebrated it. People shifted in their seats. Some looked down. Some looked directly at him, frozen. "You erased me," he continued, "but the architecture didn't forget. My fingerprints are on every blueprint. My decisions still power your dashboards. My frameworks still hold your contracts together." Sarah opened her mouth to speak. He stopped her with a glance. "I don't need your permission to be here. I built the house." Then he turned to leave. No security came. No one stood in his way. As he walked up the aisle and toward the doors, someone clapped. Chad Brinker's office door remained closed all day. His nameplate had been subtly removed from the directory by late morning, replaced with a temporary label, Executive Liaison Interim Pending. The announcement was brief, emailed under legal signature. Chad Brinker has chosen to step away to pursue new opportunities. We thank him for his years of service. No video message. No farewell party. Just silence wrapped in protocol. Employees whispered in stairwells and bathroom stalls. It was said the board forced him out. Others claimed an emergency audit had uncovered extensive manipulation of internal performance reviews. Someone even said Cashin's original contract, long believed to have been terminated, had merely been reclassified illegally by Chad himself during an unauthorized restructure. Whatever the truth, Chad was gone, erased in the very style he once perfected. Sarah Vinton, meanwhile, tried to steady the reins. She circulated a public-facing apology, carefully crafted by legal, where she acknowledged communication breakdowns and internal oversight failures. Her tone was contrite, her words clinical, but employees didn't forget the town hall footage. They remembered her laughing at Chad's jokes, how she dismissed Cashin's input as over-intellectualized, how she rose not through innovation, but by association. The apology didn't land. It ricocheted. By week's end, 2 senior engineers submitted resignations. One cited moral dissonance in their exit interview. A partner company froze its collaboration on the Atria expansion pending reassessment of leadership transparency. Internally, a rebellion brewed, not from noise, but from withdrawal. Mid-level staff stopped volunteering ideas. Initiative proposals flatlined. Meetings dragged into silence. The spirit of Helix, once sharp, aggressive, hungry, had dulled. It was a company without a compass. They had cut out their architect, and now the walls whispered in every hallway. HR, in a panic, reinstated dormant mentorship programs, hoping to re-engage senior talent. But no one volunteered to lead. Requests for coaching fell on tired eyes. Those who remained loyal to Chad began quietly distancing themselves. Slack profiles changed. Biographies were updated. Digital trails erased. It was corporate survival at its most clinical. Nobody wanted to be caught on the wrong side of history. Then came the press leak. An anonymous tip, its origin impossible to trace, provided journalists with portions of the footage from the town hall, along with screenshots of documents Cashin had shown. The story hit the wire late Thursday. Founder erased, allegations of intellectual theft and corporate exclusion at Helix. Within hours, the company's stock dropped 4 points. An emergency press briefing was held the next morning. This time, it wasn't Sarah who addressed the camera. It was one of the board chairs, flown in overnight. He spoke sternly of leadership reevaluation and organizational humility, but avoided direct reference to Cashin. The omission was deafening. Across LinkedIn, former employees began resharing old photos, snapshots from Helix's early days. In several of them, Cashin appeared in the background, always quiet, always working. His face became a symbol, not a vengeance, of erasure reversed. Internally, employees began asking the question leadership feared. How many others have we buried this way? An internal review committee was assembled. Investigations began, and as each layer peeled back, it revealed a pattern of behavior that had been institutionalized, not incidental. Promotions built on stolen work. performance reviews manipulated, cultural contributions dismissed unless they came from the right faces. The rot ran deep, and it hadn't started with Cashin. He had just been the most visible wound. The board moved swiftly. They dissolved Sarah's position within a week, replacing her with a co-led structure emphasizing transparency and historical integrity. 2 directors were placed on leave. The phrase restorative realignment became the HR department's new slogan, printed in laminated posters and peppered into emails like it might cleanse what had been broken. But there was no restoring trust through slogans. You couldn't laminate dignity, and they all knew it. Meanwhile, Cashin remained silent. He didn't speak to the press. He didn't return emails. He didn't post cryptic updates or seek re-entry. His silence became its own power. The company had made him invisible. Now he allowed them to feel what absence really meant. The months that followed were colder than usual, not in temperature, but in tone. Helix HQ no longer pulsed with confident swagger or brash innovation. The lobby, once filled with gleaming banners and buzzwords like disruption and ownership mindset, now bore a single, sanitized display: resilience through reflection. The executives who survived the restructuring avoided eye contact in elevators. Conversations that once sparkled with ambition were now colored with caution. Every new hire asked quietly about the founder story during onboarding, and every old employee knew better than to answer it honestly. The tale of Cashin Rowe had gone from whispered discomfort to institutional legend. He was never framed as a martyr, too calm, too intentional, nor as a rebel, too quiet, too surgical in his dismantling. He became something more dangerous than either: proof. Proof that erasure doesn't mean absence. That being unseen is not the same as being irrelevant. That the truth, when timed correctly, is not a scream but a scalpel. At Helix, the term Rowe moment entered the lexicon. It wasn't said aloud during meetings, but it lived in the pauses before signing off on exclusionary decisions. It surfaced in glances exchanged during strategy sessions when someone's name was left off a deck. It crept into HR policies as clauses about legacy review and authorship integrity. No one admitted it, but everyone understood what it meant. Don't let another one happen. The new leadership team installed transparent promotion tracking. Every contribution was tagged to an internal chain. Performance reviews had to be peer-reviewed and audited quarterly. Founding documents were restored, with Cashin's name reinstated retroactively. But it wasn't just about correcting a record. It was about institutional penance. They knew they couldn't undo what had been done, so they tried to build forward in a way that acknowledged the foundation they once paved over. Outside those walls, Cashin Rowe did not vanish, but he did not return either. He declined speaking invitations, rejected equity offers, and quietly redirected networking attempts to his former interns, many of whom were now rising fast. Occasionally, he responded to emails, but only to ask one question: did you build it or did you inherit it? It was never judgment. It was a reminder. He had once inherited nothing. Not visibility, not status, not protection. He had built, and then been erased, and then had chosen not to destroy, but to reveal. Somewhere in the city, he rented a quiet workspace above a secondhand bookstore, where he wrote in notebooks and designed frameworks without a logo. The door bore no title. Inside, the walls were bare except for one framed image, a copy of the town hall slide where his name was crossed out in red. Below it, a single handwritten note: they can't take what they can't find. He didn't need applause. His work wasn't about vindication, it was about prevention. Across the industry, companies began revisiting their internal histories. Founders, once forgotten, were rediscovered. Strategic models were reevaluated. Younger talent began asking harder questions. The unspoken bias that had once erased voices like Cashin's couldn't be killed entirely, but it was now harder to hide behind. There were fewer excuses, less tolerance for corporate amnesia. At Helix, a new leadership summit was announced to mark the company's formal cultural reset. They invited contributors from every level to speak, no titles attached, just roles. Among them was a young analyst named Amelia Hart, someone Cashin had once mentored briefly before his exclusion. She took the stage, nervous but clear. Her voice trembled only once. She told a story, not about her achievements, but about the time she watched a man who had built something beautiful get cut out, how she had stayed silent then, and how she would never again. When she finished, the room stood, not because she was famous, but because they all saw the point. Not one person applauded out of politeness. They did it because they felt complicit, because somewhere each of them had looked away once, and Cashin's silence had made them remember. The summit didn't fix everything, but it was honest, and that was new. Outside the auditorium, Emilia found a small envelope in her bag. No name, no sender. Inside was a card that read, "Build it better." On the back, a faint, handwritten CR. She looked up, scanning the crowd, but he wasn't there. He never was. And that, she realized, was the lesson. Not every architect demands to be seen, but every structure must remember who laid its foundation. Because justice, when done right, doesn't end in applause. It ends in prevention, in changed systems, in echoes that keep false power afraid, in truth, once spoken, that never quite leaves the room. And somewhere in a quiet office with no plaque, Cashin Rowe closed another notebook. Not angry, not proud, just finished. Not with his mission, but with the chapter they once tried to write without him. The end. If you've made it this far, thank you for sticking with this powerful journey. If you're enjoying the story and want to see more, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps a lot and keeps this kind of storytelling going strong. What do you think about Cashin's rise and the downfall of those who tried to erase him? Were you expecting that final turn? I'd love to know what theories you had along the way. Also, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I'm always curious how far these stories travel. Stay tuned. There's more coming.